The black ocean of space was calm as the alien fleet floated in formation, their sleek silver warships shining under the faint light of a distant sun, each vessel armed with layers of armor and heavy weapons built for war. The crews moved with practiced discipline, their voices steady and their eyes on the screens. But then something appeared on the long-range sensors, a single human warship dropping out of hyperspace. Without warning the moment it appeared, the control room of the Varkan flagship fell silent. Captain Vaynar stood at the center of the bridge, his tall figure framed by the glowing maps that floated in the air around him. He was a veteran of many battles, his scarred skin showing the price of decades in service. But even he felt a small twist in his chest when he saw the human vessel on the display. It was nothing like he expected. Instead of the thick shining armor he knew human ships carried, this one looked bare. Sections of the hull were open, showing strange inner structures. The edges were scorched and dark, as if it had come through fire. The plating was missing in many places, leaving gaps where black metal ribs curved like bones of some old creature. Around him the officers began to whisper, their voices low and uncertain. Is it damaged? Is it a decoy? Perhaps an old freighter dressed up to look dangerous? Vaynar narrowed his eyes. The sensors showed the ship was armed, but not heavily, not compared to Varkan standards, and yet something in the way it moved made him uneasy. It was not drifting like a wounded animal. Instead it came forward with steady purpose, slow but confident, as if it had nothing to fear. The alien flagship adjusted position to block the intruder, a faint hum filling the bridge. As their shields came online, the other ships in the fleet spread into a wide net ready to surround the lone vessel. Vaynar ordered the communications officer to open a channel. The moment it connected, he expected to hear demands or warnings, but instead a calm human voice spoke first. Why is your warship missing armor? For a moment Vaynar thought he had misheard. He glanced at his officers, but they all had the same puzzled look. The human voice had no anger in it, only curiosity, and something else, something that made the skin along Vaynar's neck tighten. It was not fear, it was not challenge, it was the kind of tone used by a teacher asking a student why they had made a dangerous mistake. Vaynar took a slow breath and replied in his deep, steady voice, "We are fully armored. Every section of our hull is plated in reinforced alloys. Why do you ask this?" The answer came with the same calm tone. Because if you need armor, it means you expect to be hit. The bridge was silent again. The alien officers looked at each other in quiet confusion. The meaning was unclear, but there was something in the words that felt like a hidden blade, something sharp that the mind touched only after a moment delay. The human ship drew closer, its strange bare hull catching the light of the distant star like a ghost moving through the dark. The missing armor did not make it look weak, it made it look dangerous, like a predator that had no need for the shell others wore. Vaynar's instincts whispered that this was not a mistake, not damage, not desperation, but design. He studied the tactical screen. Every detail of the human vessel was wrong. The proportions, the angles, the strange glowing veins that ran along its sides, none of it matched the human ships in the Varkan database, and yet the energy readings were strong, too strong for something that looked so exposed. One of the younger officers leaned toward the captain. "Should we prepare to fire?" Vaynar shook his head. Not yet. He wanted to understand first. Battles were not won by rushing at what you did not understand. Battles were won by knowing your enemy before the first shot was fired. The human vessel slowed to a halt just outside the main firing range, its shape turning slightly to show the empty spaces in its hull. The alien officers could see through parts of it to the stars beyond, and it was wrong, so wrong, for a warship to be built like that. Vaynar opened his mouth to speak again, but before he could the human voice returned, soft and almost friendly. "Tell me, Captain, are your ships fast enough to avoid being hit?" The words were simple, yet they carried weight, like the slow pull of gravity in a deep well. Vaynar did not answer right away. His mind was turning over the meaning, and what kind of commander would ask such a thing in the middle of a potential battle? The human vessel remained motionless, waiting for a reply, its lights faint, its weapons cold and silent. Yet there was a strange feeling in the air, as if the whole fleet was holding its breath. Vaynar finally spoke, choosing his words with care. "We do not run from battle." The human voice gave a short laugh, not mocking, but almost sad. "I see." Before Vaynar could speak again, the human ship shifted slightly, its hull catching the light in a way that made it look like the armor gaps were mouths ready to swallow whatever came close. And in that moment Vaynar felt the first real chill run through him. Since the start of the encounter, something told him that the missing armor was not a weakness at all, but a warning. And as the two ships faced each other in the cold silence of space, the question still hung in the air unanswered. Why is your warship missing armor? And what did it mean for everyone in that system? The bridge of the Varkon flagship felt heavier, now the air thick with a tension that had no name. The human vessel hung in the dark, like a shadow that had weighed its strange bare hull, turning slowly, as if it were studying them just as much as they were studying it. The gaps where armor should have been were like windows into something alien, yet the ship was human-built, and this contradiction gnawed at every officer present. Captain Vaynar's mind worked like a cold machine as he considered the human's strange first words. The question they had asked was not just odd, it was unsettling. The way it was delivered, without threat, yet carrying a quiet authority, made it even more so. Vaynar had faced warlords who shouted their challenges, and pirates who spat curses and lies, but he had never faced an enemy who opened with a question that felt like it could cut open the mind and spill its fears. Why is your warship missing armor? The question had not been asked to mock, nor to trick. It had been asked like it was the key to a door Vaynar did not know existed, and once the door was open, something dangerous would step through. The crew whispered to each other in low voices. The comms officer adjusted the channel. The weapons officer kept glancing at the targeting screens, as if expecting the human ship to suddenly vanish and reappear somewhere lethal. The sensor chief's 4 eyes stayed fixed on the energy readouts that kept shifting in strange patterns. Nothing about the readings matched the database. It was as if the human ship systems were rewriting themselves in real time. Vaynar finally spoke again, his voice even but carrying weight. You asked why our ship has armor. Because we expect to be hit. Yes, we expect to be attacked, as do all wise commanders in war. There was a short pause before the human replied, their voice calm but almost amused. Expecting to be hit means you have already accepted that you will fail to avoid the strike. We do not fight to survive, Captain. We fight to never be touched. The words echoed in the bridge like a slow ripple through still water. One officer muttered that this was nonsense. Another said it was arrogance. But Vaynar did not dismiss it so quickly. He had fought too many battles to ignore the possibility that this was not arrogance, but strategy, a dangerous strategy. The human captain continued, speaking each word precise. We removed our armor because armor slows us. Armor makes you think you can take a hit. Armor makes you lazy. We learned that long ago. Vaynar narrowed his eyes at the tactical display. This ship looked nothing like the heavy armored beast the humans had sent in past wars, yet it radiated the same quiet confidence of a predator that had never known defeat. He thought of ancient stories told by his people of hunters who carried no shields because they moved so fast the prey could never strike back. The sensor chief suddenly spoke. Captain, there's something strange about the hull readings. There's no shield array, no armor plating, no conventional defenses. But there is an energy field around the vessel. It is faint, yet its signature changes every few seconds, adapting to our scans, almost as if it is learning from them. Vaynar felt the muscles in his jaw tighten. Adaptive defenses were rare and dangerous, and if the human ship had something beyond even that, then the missing armor was not a weakness, it was a challenge. The human voice broke into his thoughts again. Captain, have you ever wondered why wars end quickly when humans fight? Vaynar did not answer at once. The crew looked at him, expecting a firm dismissal, but instead he asked why. Because we do not give our enemies the chance to breathe, the human said, in the same even tone. We end the fight before the fight begins. Some of the younger officers scoffed, but Vaynar kept silent, thinking of past reports from the front lines. There were stories of human ships that had struck with impossible speed, hitting multiple targets before the enemy could even lock on. Those stories had always been dismissed as exaggerations meant to frighten opponents. Now he was not so sure. The human captain's voice softened, almost as if speaking to an equal. Captain, I will tell you a secret. Armor is not the wall that keeps you alive. Speed is, and precision is. If you cannot be hit, you do not need armor. And if you can strike before your enemy even moves, then armor is a waste of mass. A deep unease settled over the Varkon bridge. The human was not threatening them, not yet, but the way they spoke made every officer feel as if the outcome of a battle had already been decided, and they were on the wrong side of it. Vaynar leaned forward and said in a careful tone, you claim you do not expect to be hit. What if you are? The reply came without hesitation. If we are, then the battle is already over for the one who struck us. The words landed like cold metal in the room. Several officers turned their eyes to Vaynar, waiting for an order to raise weapons, But Vaynar held his hand. He wanted to see more, to understand the human's game. The tactical display flickered for a moment, showing a pulse from the human ship's engines. It was subtle, almost too small to notice, but the sensor chief reported that the movement was intentional, a controlled shift in position, like a fighter adjusting its stance before a strike. Vaynar felt the strange pressure in the air grow heavier. He knew the human ship could not match the fleet in sheer firepower, but he also knew that a single mistake could make firepower irrelevant. He decided to test and prepare a targeting scan. He ordered his weapons officer, "But do not fire, yet I want to see how they respond." The weapons officer complied, sending a high-resolution scan toward the human vessel. Within moments, the human ship's energy field shifted again, bending in ways no shield should bend. The readings warped, becoming unreadable, as if the ship had swallowed the scan and hidden itself in the gaps between the data. The human captain spoke once more in that calm, measured tone, "Scanning us is not wise, Captain." "And why is that?" Vaynar asked. "Because the last thing you want is for us to know you are thinking about firing," the human replied. The bridge went silent again. Vaynar could feel the heartbeat of every officer quickening. Even his own was heavier in his chest. It was not just the words, it was the certainty behind them. The human was not bluffing. He believed every word he spoke, and Vaynar knew belief was sometimes more dangerous than weapons. The human vessel moved slightly again, rotating so that its exposed sections were clearly visible, as if daring the Varkan fleet to try something. Vaynar studied those dark gaps, trying to imagine what was hidden inside them. Weapons, perhaps engines, perhaps something stranger. Whatever it was, the human was not afraid to show it. Then the human captain spoke for the last time in that exchange. "Captain, the question you should be asking is not why our warship is missing armor, but why yours still has it." The comm channel cut off, leaving only the quiet hum of the ship and the cold starlight on the display. The crew shifted uneasily, their eyes on Vaynar, waiting for him to speak. But he said nothing, his mind turning over those last words again and again, because deep down he suspected the human was right, and that thought was more dangerous than any weapon the humans might carry. The control room of the Varkan flagship felt colder than before, as if the human's last words had stolen some of the heat from the air. The officers moved at their stations with stiff shoulders, their eyes flicking to the strange vessel that hung in the black void just beyond their firing range. The gaps in its hull were like open mouths that refused to speak their secrets. The human ship drifted without hurry, as though it owned the space between the stars. Captain Vaynar stood with hands clasped behind his back, his gaze locked on the tactical display. The human captain's question had planted a thorn in his thoughts, one that dug deeper each time. He tried to ignore it. He needed to know what was hidden inside that exposed frame, what could replace the safety of armor, and yet inspire such confidence in a commander. Vaynar turned to his sensor chief, his voice steady but low. "Initiate a full spectrum scan. I want every layer, every frequency. If there is anything on that hull that can hide from us, I want to see it." The sensor chief nodded, his thin fingers moving across the glowing panel in smooth, practiced motions. The Varkan flagship's scanning arrays began to hum, a deep vibration that ran through the deck plates. Energy waves rippled out from the ship, invisible to the eye, but powerful enough to map an asteroid field to the grain of its smallest stone. The human vessel would have no place to hide. Or so Vaynar believed. The first readings came in showing the basic shape of the hull. It was as they saw with their own eyes, bare framework, strange angular plating like shards of glass scattered across a metal skeleton, energy lines glowing faintly in patterns that made no sense to Varkan design. The outer surface reflected little of the scanning pulse, instead bending it in strange curves that fed distorted data back to the sensors. The sensor chief frowned, adjusting the arrays for a tighter pass. The second sweep reached deeper into the vessel, tracing the outlines of inner structures. But even here the readings shifted like sand underwater. Nothing stayed the same. For more than a breath, the ship seemed to rewrite its own composition in response to the scan, a defense system unlike any Vaynar had encountered. The weapons officer leaned closer to his display. "Captain, it's as if the hull is alive. It's not shielding itself in the usual way, it's adapting to our probe." The human vessel rotated slowly during the scan, as if to show every exposed section to the Varkan fleet, daring them to keep looking. Vaynar watched the movement with narrowed eyes. The slow turn was controlled, precise, too deliberate to be random. Then the energy readings began to climb, a subtle increase at first, then sharper, as the adaptive field around the human vessel changed its pattern. It was no longer merely bending the scan. It was feeding something back, a signal of its own. The comms officer raised his head. Captain, the human ship is transmitting, but not on any open channel. It's sending something directly into our sensor systems. Vaynar's eyes darkened. Cut the scan. Too late. The sensor displays flickered once, twice, then cleared again, showing a perfect image of the Varkan flagship itself. Every weapon, every weak point, every line of energy flow. The human ship had scanned them in return, and had done so faster, cleaner, and more completely than any Varkan system could. Murmurs filled the bridge. One officer cursed under his breath. Another asked if they should raise shields, but the shields were already up, and it had made no difference. The human vessel had looked straight through them. The comm channel opened without request. The human captain's voice calm as before. Captain, I would not scan us again, if I were you, unless you enjoy giving away your secrets. Vaynar felt a muscle twitch in his jaw. He knew then that every advantage he thought he had was slipping away. If the humans could strip away their defenses and still gather such perfect intelligence in seconds, then the missing armor was not only deliberate, it was part of something far more dangerous. He spoke in a measured voice. You have our image. Now what do you intend to do with it? The human captain gave a small sound that might have been a chuckle. Nothing, unless you make it necessary. Vaynar considered the words. They carried no heat, no direct threat, and yet he could feel the pressure behind them, the certainty of a commander who did not need to shout to make his power known. The sensor chief interrupted his thoughts. Captain, I have something else. The field around their ship is not static. It's generating patterns, almost like code. I think it's communicating with itself or with something else nearby, but I cannot tell what. It's too fast. The human vessel shifted again, drifting a few lengths to the side, its movement graceful, almost like a predator pacing just outside reach. Vaynar watched carefully. The ship's exposed ribs glinted faintly under the distant star, and for a moment he thought he saw shapes moving inside, but they vanished when he tried to focus. The weapons officer asked quietly, should we test their defenses with a light round? See if the hull reacts. Vaynar hesitated. A test shot might reveal something about the ship's true protection, but it might also trigger whatever they were holding back. He weighed the risk in silence until the human voice returned. If you fire, Captain, you will learn something, yes, but not what you hope to learn. The quiet confidence in those words stirred unease in the crew. They had fought countless enemies, but this felt different. There was no visible threat, yet the sense of danger was as real as the cold metal beneath their feet. Vaynar decided to try a different path. Tell me, human, how does a vessel without armor survive a real fight? The answer came without pause. By never allowing the fight to become real for us, Captain. We end it before it begins. The bridge was silent once more, the meaning clear and heavy. If the human struck first, and always struck with precision, then armor became pointless, because their enemies never had time to answer back. Vaynar wondered how many fleets had learned this truth too late. The human ship slowed again, holding its place in the void, its lights dimming slightly, as if entering a patient. Watched the adaptive field around it pulsed in steady rhythm, like the beat of a heart. The sensor chief whispered that the pulse matched the flagship's own power cycle, as if the human ship were syncing itself to their systems. Vaynar stared at the vessel, and for the first time in many years, he felt the old chill of uncertainty he had not felt since his earliest battles, when victory was never certain and survival depended on instinct alone. The human voice came one final time, in that same unshaken tone. You have scanned us. Now, Captain, perhaps you should ask yourself what we learned about you, and why we are still here instead of gone. The channel closed. The displays showed the human vessel holding its silent watch in the black. The crew looked to Vaynar for direction, but he kept his eyes on the ghost-like shape in the dark, his thoughts a slow storm in his mind, because he knew the answer might already be written in the human's calm words, and in the missing armor that was not weakness but warning. The silence on the bridge of the Varkan flagship felt heavier than the hull around it, the crew working in tense quiet, their eyes on glowing screens that showed the lone human vessel drifting in the black void, the gaps in its hull catching faint light, like the bones of some deep space predator. Captain Vaynar stood at the center, his mind weighing the risks of every move, as if each choice might open a door that could never be closed again. He had seen enough of the human ship's strange behavior to know it was dangerous, but knowledge without proof was a blade without a handle. He needed to see its defense in action. He needed to know if the missing armor was truly weakness, or if it was part of some weapon hidden in plain sight. His instincts whispered that testing it would not end well, but instinct alone could not guide a fleet. They needed answers, and they needed them now. Vaynar's gaze moved to the weapons officer, whose hands rested on the controls, ready for orders. Send a single-rail slug. He set his voice calm and controlled aim for one of the exposed sections. Minimum power, no warhead, just a piece of metal moving fast enough to test their reaction. The weapons officer hesitated, glancing toward the sensor chief, as if hoping for objection. None came. The order was clear. The shot was meant as a probe, not an attack, the kind of move that might reveal a secret without starting a war. At least that was the hope. The crew worked quickly. The slug loaded into the rail launcher, the targeting array locking onto the human vessel. The hum of charging coils filled the bridge like the breath before a storm. Vaynar watched the tactical display as the shot fired a thin line on the screen, racing toward the bare rib of the human ship. The slug moved fast, too fast for most shields to adapt, but this was not most ships. Halfway to its target, the slug vanished. There was no explosion, no flash, no visible strike. It simply dissolved into glittering fragments of energy that faded into the void. The crew stared in stunned silence, their screens showing nothing but empty space, where a moment ago a solid projectile had been. The sensor chief's voice was quiet, almost uncertain. The slug was destroyed, sir, but not by shields, not by armor either. It was disassembled. Vaynar turned his eyes to the human vessel, which had not moved at all, its field still pulsing in that strange rhythm. The comm channel opened without request, and the human captain's voice flowed into the bridge. Calm as ever. I would not do that again, Captain. The words were not a threat, yet every officer on the bridge felt the weight in them, the certainty of someone who knew exactly what would happen if the warning was ignored. Vaynar spoke evenly. Your defenses are impressive, I will admit, but every defense can be broken. The human captain replied in the same tone. Perhaps, but you are assuming this was defense, and not something else entirely. The implication hung in the air like a shadow too large to measure. Was it possible that the human ship had not simply blocked the attack, but had used it, learned from it, perhaps even taken something from it? The idea was unsettling. The weapons officer whispered that the data from the slug's telemetry ended before the point of destruction, meaning whatever destroyed it had done so faster than the sensors could record. Vaynar knew what that meant: speed beyond calculation, precision beyond ordinary weaponry. It was not luck, it was design. The human vessel began to move slowly, drifting a short distance before stopping again, the gaps in its hull still exposed, as if to taunt the Varkon fleet. Vaynar felt the urge to order another shot, to test it again, but the memory of the vanishing slug held him back. The comm channel opened again, this time with a question from a human captain. Tell me, Captain, how much armor does your flagship carry? Vaynar answered without hesitation. Reinforced alloys, triple-layered over all critical systems. And yet the human voice continued, without pause. If we had fired instead of you, would that armor have saved you? Vaynar did not answer right away. He did not like questions whose answers could weaken the confidence of his crew. Instead, he asked, what are you implying? I am not implying, Captain. I am telling you armor is only useful against something too slow to avoid or too weak to pierce it. We are neither. The bridge was silent save for the quiet hum of systems, the crew shifting uneasily at their posts. One or two officers avoided meeting Vaynar's gaze. He could feel the atmosphere of the room, tilting like the slow lean of a ship in heavy tide. He decided to shift the focus. Tell me, human, if you do not rely on armor, and your defenses are so certain, why show yourself here? Why not simply pass unseen? The human captain's answer came without hesitation. Because sometimes it is important to be seen, Captain. Sometimes it is important to remind others of the gap between what they think is possible and what truly is. Vaynar felt the cold certainty in those words. This encounter was not chance. It was deliberate. The human ship was here to make a point, and every moment it remained was part of that message. The human vessel began to rotate again, this time showing its rear engines to the Varkon fleet. The glow from within the exposed sections was brighter, now patterns of light running along the inner ribs, like veins of molten metal. Vaynar's sensor chief reported rising energy levels, but could not match them to any known weapon. The readings shifted too quickly, as if the ship itself was alive and deciding what to become. Vaynar took a step forward, his voice low but clear. What are you preparing, human? The reply was almost gentle, demonstrating. Before Vaynar could order shields to maximum, the human ship moved a blur across the tactical display, disappearing from its position and reappearing behind the Varkon flagship. Targeting alarms blared through the bridge as every system screamed that the human vessel had locked weapons on them, not just the flagship, but the entire fleet spread across the sector. The crew froze, expecting the strike to come, but it never did. Instead, the human ship powered its weapons down as quickly as it had armed them. The locks vanished, and the vessel drifted once more into neutral position behind the flagship. The human captain's voice returned, not angry, not triumphant, just calm. "We do not need armor, because we do not give our enemies the chance to strike. If you remember nothing else from this meeting, remember that." The channel closed, the fleet's systems returned to normal, but the tension in the bridge did not fade. Vaynar looked at the tactical display and saw the truth in the humans' demonstration. They had crossed the entire kill zone of a Varkon battle group without a single ship firing a shot, not because they could not, but because they knew it would not matter. The missing armor was no weakness, it was a statement, and every officer in the Varkon fleet understood that now, whether they wished to or not. The bridge of the Varkon flagship felt like a sealed vault holding a secret too heavy for the air inside to carry. The crew stood in their stations, their movements sharp but slower than before, their minds still wrapped around the image of the human vessel appearing behind them, without warning and without armor, yet holding the entire fleet at its mercy. Captain Vaynar kept his eyes on the tactical display, the human ship, now drifting just outside direct range, as if it had never moved at all. His thoughts moved like cold rivers through rock-cutting paths into the possibility that every assumption they held about warfare was wrong. The humans had not attacked, yet they had proved in a single movement that they could destroy the fleet if they wished, and what struck him hardest was the way they had done it, without raising their voice or their weapons for more than a breath. The comm channel opened again, without request, the human captain's voice entering the bridge, like a whisper in a silent hall. "Captain, you asked earlier why our warship is missing armor. Allow me to answer more completely." The crew turned their attention to the voice, as if drawn by unseen gravity. Even those who had doubted the human's words earlier now listened with attention that could not be hidden. The human spoke with a slow, calm rhythm, each sentence like a step forward through a dark corridor. "Armor slows you down, Captain. It weighs you not only in mass, but in thought. It tells you that you can take a blow. So you plan to take one. We do not plan to take any blows. We move faster than they can reach us, and we strike before they can understand. We learned this because those who fought us in the past forced us to." Vaynar kept his eyes on the human vessel, the strange glowing veins along its frame pulsing like a heartbeat, the adaptive field shimmering faintly around it. He could not deny the truth in their words. The maneuver they had performed earlier was proof enough: speed, precision, unpredictability. These were their armor. The human continued, speaking in that same measured tone. "When we remove armor, we are not making ourselves weaker. We are making ourselves faster. When we make ourselves faster, we make the enemy slower, because they cannot touch what they cannot reach. And while they waste time chasing us, we are ending the fight." The weapons officer whispered almost to himself, "It is not defense, it is avoidance." The human captain's voice seemed to respond directly to that thought. "Yes, avoidance, but not running. We do not run from the fight, Captain. We simply take the only position in it that matters, the one from which our enemy cannot return fire." The bridge was silent, but Vaynar could feel the slow shift in the room, the understanding settling in like a new gravity, pulling their old beliefs into unfamiliar shapes. Vaynar asked the question that had been in his mind since their first exchange, "And if somehow you are struck, what then?" There was the faintest pause before the human answered, "Then the one who struck us does not live long enough to strike again. Our systems are built not only to avoid damage, but to punish any attempt to cause it. That is the part you do not see from where you stand." The words sank into the crew like the weight of deep water. Vaynar could see in their faces that they were imagining it, the unseen retaliation, the weapon hidden in the spaces where armor would have been, and he knew they were right to imagine it. The sensor chief spoke quietly, "Captain, the readings from their hull suggest more than energy shielding. There are fluctuations that could be concealed emitters or high-output projectors. I cannot confirm because the field keeps scrambling the data." Vaynar's gaze did not leave the human ship. "You are telling me your design is built on never being hit, and if hit on, ending the fight instantly?" The human captain replied, "Exactly, and that is why we do not hide our missing armor. We want you to see it, we want you to think about it, because the more you think, the less you act, and the less you act, the closer we are to winning, without firing a single shot. The comm channel went quiet again, but the impact of the words remained like a low hum beneath the sound of the flagship systems. Vaynar knew that the human was right in another way as well. Every second they spent speaking instead of firing was another second the human ship remained unchallenged. He tried to push back against the tide of this realization. Perhaps this is only your way of avoiding direct confrontation. Perhaps, without armor, you could not survive a drawn battle. The human captain's voice returned, "No, Captain, without armor, we do not need to survive a drawn battle, because there will never be one." The words were not spoken as a threat, but as a truth carved into something older than this encounter, older than the fleet, older perhaps than the Varkan Empire itself. It was the voice of a commander who had seen the pattern of countless battles and shaped their forces to fit it perfectly. The human vessel shifted slightly, as if stretching its strange open frame, the pulsing veins of light brightening for a moment before fading back to their usual glow. Vaynar thought it looked like a predator ready to move again if needed. The weapons officer asked quietly, "What are your orders, Captain?" Vaynar did not answer right away, his mind still working through the layers of the human's words and actions. This was no random meeting. The human ship was here for a reason, and he was beginning to suspect that reason was not an accident of patrol routes, but something chosen, something meant to plant this very doubt in his mind. The human captain spoke one final time in that exchange. "Captain, you now understand why our ship carries no armor, but you have yet to ask the more important question." Vaynar's voice was low. "What question is that?" "Why yours still does." The calm line closed, the voice gone, but the meaning clear. Vaynar stood in the silence that followed, feeling the weight of the question settle over him heavier than any armor his ship carried. And in that moment he realized the human had done exactly what they intended. They had not just shown their strength, they had made him doubt his own. The silence on the Varkan flagship stretched into something dense enough to feel like a physical barrier. The crew worked at their stations with quiet precision, but their minds were far from the readouts and displays, each one replaying the human captain's final words. "Why yours still does." The sentence had coiled itself around their thoughts like a tightening chain. Captain Vaynar stood with his hands clasped behind his back, staring at the human vessel that floated just beyond their reach, every flicker of its strange energy veins a reminder that it could move again at any second. Without warning, he had expected a battle when the ship appeared, but instead he found himself caught in a game that felt less like war and more like being outplayed in a game whose rules he had never learned. The comms officer spoke quietly. "Captain, the human ship is powering something. No weapons lock yet, but the field signatures are changing. I cannot match them to anything in our database." Vaynar nodded, once his eyes narrowing. "This is it." He thought, "They are about to show us something," and the realization carried no comfort. The human ship began to move, not forward, but sideways, a smooth, almost lazy drift that carried it into open space, away from the fleet's primary formation. The motion was unhurried, almost graceful, as though they had all the time in the galaxy. The Varkan sensors strained to follow every fluctuation in its output. Then, without acceleration warnings, without build-up, the ship vanished from the tactical display, only to reappear 3,000 meters behind the Varkan flagship, the same space it had occupied in its first maneuver earlier. The bridge crew froze in collective stillness. The movement had been instantaneous, even faster than before, and the sensors registered a distortion wave that should not have been possible for any known propulsion system. Vaynar felt the old instincts in him stir, the kind that warned when prey was not prey at all, but predator. The human captain's voice returned to the bridge, like the slow closing of a door behind them. "Captain, you understand now that speed is not simply about reaching a location before the enemy. It is about removing the enemy's ability to even think of stopping you." The human ship drifted closer. This time, the shimmering adaptive field around it intensified so much that it blurred the edges of its open frame. The pulsing light along its structure quickened. The Varkan scanners struggled to penetrate the field, the data streams filling with errors and null readings. Suddenly, a beam of pure white light erupted from the human vessel. It did not strike the Varkan flagship, nor any ship in the fleet. Instead, it lanced into empty space ahead of them. The beam lasted no more than 2 seconds, but in that time every system in the fleet registered a simultaneous surge of energy, so vast it overloaded their long-range sensors. The space where the beam had passed remained distorted, as if reality itself had been stretched and not yet returned to its natural form. The weapons officer looked to Vaynar in disbelief. That was not a weapon signature from any known database, Captain. It did not even register as an energy discharge. It was more like an event. The human captain spoke again calmly, as if explaining a basic concept. This is not the strongest of our weapons, Captain. It is merely the quietest, and it is designed to remind those watching that space itself can be made to obey us. We can bend it, and with enough focus we can fold it. And when we fold it, there is no ship fast enough, no armor strong enough to survive the closing. The crew exchanged silent glances. This was no bluff. The distortion still hung in space like a scar, and even without understanding the technology, they felt its power in their bones. Vaynar's voice was steady, though it carried the weight of growing unease. You could have aimed that at us. Why did you not? Because Captain, the human said, we are not here to destroy you. We are here to make you understand destruction is the simplest thing in the universe. To cause the harder thing is to leave your enemy alive with the knowledge of what could have been done to them, the knowledge that at any moment it still could. The human ship vanished again, this time reappearing alongside the Varkan flagship. So close the adaptive field brushed against the shields and caused them to ripple visibly. The proximity alarm screamed, but the human vessel did nothing. No weapons fire, no collision, only presence. Every console on the bridge flashed as the human ship transmitted something into their systems. The data poured in without resistance, the Varkan security measures barely reacting before it was complete. A stream of battle recordings from past human encounters, each one showing a different alien fleet. And in every single one the human ship destroyed its opponent. In seconds the patterns were clear: vanish, reappear, strike, with impossible precision, and then nothing left but debris. The recordings ended as abruptly as they began, and the human captain's voice returned. This is what happens when we choose not to talk first. The bridge was silent again, but this silence was different. It was the silence of understanding. The Varkan crew now knew the human ship had not even begun to fight here, and already it had moved their fleet like pieces on a board. Vaynar's throat felt dry, yet he kept his voice even. You have shown me speed. You have shown me a weapon that bends the very fabric of space itself. What do you want from us? The human's answer came without hesitation. Nothing, Captain, except that you remember this moment. When you think of war with us, we have fought too many who believed they could learn our limits by forcing our hand. We have no limits that you can reach without ending yourselves in the process. The human ship drifted back, pulling away from the flagship, its adaptive field fading slightly until its strange skeletal frame was clear again. It seemed almost small compared to the vast Varkan vessel, yet in every mind on the bridge it loomed larger than the entire fleet. Vaynar knew they could fire now. Every ship in range could unleash their weapons, and yet there was no part of him that believed it would matter. The human ship would vanish before a single shot struck, or worse, they would let the shot strike and then show the retaliation they had hinted at earlier. The human captain's final words came with a weight that pressed into every mind on the bridge. You asked earlier why we have no armor. Perhaps now you understand. It is because we do not need to block what will never touch us, and because sometimes the greatest weapon is the belief that you cannot be harmed at all. The comm link closed. The human ship turned, and in a flicker of motion was gone, leaving only the lingering distortion in space and the knowledge that every ship in the Varkan fleet had just witnessed a power they could neither match nor counter. The bridge remained frozen for long seconds until Vaynar finally spoke. Resume course, but mark this encounter in the highest priority archives. It will not be forgotten. The crew obeyed, but their movements were slower, each one knowing that somewhere out there the human vessel still moved unseen, and that if it returned it would not be to speak again. The great hall was silent except for the faint hum of the ship's systems as Commander Jareth stood before the circle of alien officers, each one watching him with eyes that carried both fear and curiosity. The glow from the overhead lights painted shadows across their faces, making them appear carved from stone. The air felt heavy, as if the ship itself was holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. The Grand Marshal of the Thalkor Empire leaned forward, his massive frame towering over the table, his voice a low rumble that rolled across the room like distant thunder. He asked Commander Jareth one final question, the one that would decide the fate of every soul on both ships, and perhaps the fate of the uneasy peace between their peoples. Tell me, human, why is it that when we first saw your warship we saw armor missing, yet it stood in the battle without falling? Jareth took a slow breath, his eyes moving from one alien officer to the next, his voice calm, yet carrying a weight that pressed against the walls of the hall. He told them the truth they had not expected, and perhaps could never fully understand. You see, our ship has armor missing, because we do not always shield ourselves completely. We do not hide behind walls. When the fight comes to us, we adapt, we bend, but we do not break. A murmur passed among the alien officers, some with scales shifting uneasily, others with mandibles clicking in thought. They had always believed strength came from layers of metal, from shields and energy barriers, from walls that could stop an enemy's strike. But the human commander spoke of something else, something deeper. He spoke of trust in the crew, of belief in skill, and the willingness to face danger, not by hiding from it, but by learning to move with it. Jareth explained that the gaps in the ship's armor were not mistakes, they were chosen places where the armor had been removed, so that the ship could move faster, dodge better, and strike where the enemy least expected. These gaps made the ship lighter, swifter, more unpredictable. To those who thought war was only about brute force, it was a lesson written in the design of every human vessel, that speed and cunning could be greater than sheer mass. The Grand Marshal narrowed his eyes, as if weighing the words, turning them over in his mind like a blade in his hand. You fight without hiding, yet you survive, he said slowly, his voice heavy with something close to respect. How do you keep the enemy from striking where you are weak? Jareth's answer came without hesitation. We let them strike, he said, and when they do, they find it is not weakness they strike at, but the place we want them to strike. Every gap is a trap, every opening is an invitation for them to come close enough for us to end the fight on our terms. We use their certainty against them until it destroys them. The room was still again, but now the silence was different. It was not the silence of fear or suspicion. It was the silence of minds wrestling with something new. Alien officers who had faced 100 battles were now wondering how many times the humans had already used such a strategy, without them realizing how many victories had been shaped not by the weapons humans carried, but by the way they thought about the fight. Then Jareth stepped closer to the Grand Marshal, and in a voice low enough that it seemed meant for the entire room, yet somehow only for the Marshal himself, he said, you asked why our ship was missing armor. Now I ask you this, why do you keep all your armor on? Are you afraid to face what comes without hiding? The question struck the room like a silent explosion. Every officer's gaze turned to the Grand Marshal, who did not speak. For a long moment his claws tapped slowly against the table. Then he leaned back, the corner of his mouth curling in something almost like a smile. Perhaps the humans were not the fragile creatures many had thought. Perhaps their strength was a different kind of armor, one that could not be seen or measured. The Grand Marshal finally spoke, his voice carrying across the hall in a way that felt both a warning and an acknowledgement. You have given us something to think about, Commander Jareth. Your people may be dangerous, not because of the ships you build, but because of the way you choose to fight and the way you choose to live. With that, the tension in the hall began to shift. The alien officers no longer looked at Jareth as a strange intruder, but as someone they could not easily dismiss. There was no applause, no grand announcement, only the quiet understanding that something had changed, something that could not be undone. Jareth turned to leave the hall, his steps steady, his expression calm, but inside he knew that the question he had asked in return would echo in the minds of these officers long after he was gone. It would spread through their fleets, through their councils, and perhaps even through their empires. They would wonder if the humans were right, if too much armor could be a weakness, if leaving oneself open in just the right way could be the key to victory. As he stepped onto the lift that would take him back to his ship, Jareth looked once over his shoulder at the alien officers, some still whispering, some still watching him with unreadable eyes. He gave them a small nod as the doors closed, knowing that this meeting was not the end, but the beginning of something far greater. Back aboard his ship, the crew greeted him with quiet respect. They knew, without asking, that the outcome of the meeting was not simply survival, but the planting of a seed that would grow in the minds of their potential enemies, and perhaps turn them into something else, allies, or at least opponents, who thought twice before starting a fight. As the warship turned away from the alien fleet, the stars stretched ahead, like an endless sea. The gaps in the armor gleamed faintly in the starlight, like scars that told a story, scars that spoke of battle survived and the courage to face the next. Without fear, the crew moved with renewed purpose, their hands on controls, their eyes on the horizon, ready for whatever came next. In the quiet of the command chair, Jareth allowed himself one last thought before the work, resumed the question the aliens had asked had been their test, but his question to them had been his, and in that unspoken exchange a truth had been shared, one that no armor could blot, no weapon could destroy, and no battle could erase. The human warship sailed on into the dark, its missing armor a silent challenge to all who saw it, and somewhere far behind in the great hall of the alien flagship officers still sat frozen not by fear, but by the weight of a question they could not easily answer.